You're listening to the Back Home Network, presented by Homefield Apparel.
Welcome back to Crimson Cast. Galen Clavio joining you here, along with Scott Caulfield, I think this time.
I'm here. Can you hear me? All right, we got it.
We had some technical issues and had to abort the first recording of this, but fortunately, Scott's back. We're back. NIU football is back once again, 5-0 on the season, knocking off the Maryland Terrapins on this past Saturday in what was one of the more fun, if not the most fun experiences that I can remember having at Memorial Stadium in my lifetime. Scott, I don't know how you felt about it, but it was a rollicking time in the mist and the rain as the Hoosiers knock off the Terrapins, go to 5-0 overall and 2-0 in conference play. Scott, first of all, good to see you. Happy weekend. How are you doing?
I'm doing awesome. Echo a lot of your comments. This is going to be a fun podcast. For those people who have been fans of Indiana football, fans of our coverage of the football program, I think this is going to be a fun podcast because we're in a good place. There seems to be a lot of blue skies ahead. It's good times, man. It's really good times.
Let's dive into things, but first, let's remind you that we're part of the Back Home Network here at Crimson Cast. You can listen to all of our sister and brother podcasts on the Back Home Network, whether it's Assembly Call, whether it's the Doing the Work podcast covering the IU women's basketball team, the Tuesday Night Bison Chat, which has been a lot of fun, Crimson Cash, which comes out every Thursday to give you gambling advice about college football and more. All of that under the Back Home Network banner, and all of them brought to you by Homefield Apparel, our presenting sponsor, and the place to go for the finest in college fashions, the softest fabrics, the coolest designs. And Scott, I couldn't help but think while I was standing out in the rain yesterday, man, one of those waterproof coach's jackets would have really been handy. I was not quick enough when I was ordering at the first go-around, so I'm hoping that there's some more coming relatively soon. But
I'm also like, if Connor's listening, like it's time to like whatever box you kept the 9-win Indiana shirts in, like break that box out. Like it's time you can take those off the clearance rack and put those on the new like high price rack. Like 9-win Indiana it's possible, and like we need to get some shirts around it.
Something tells me that he knows exactly where that box is. Just saying. But anyway, check out homefieldapparel.com. Go and follow Homefield on Instagram. Follow them on X. You'll find some amazing stuff. Get on their mailing list. I got a nice text message the other day about some IU stuff being back in stock. Homefield is for the people, and they love communicating their deals and specials. Just a great place to go for pretty much anything you want in the college football realm. Use the code HOME23 and get 15% off your first order. Again, that's homefieldapparel.com, proud sponsor of the Back Home Network. Also, a reminder, folks, that we are sponsored by the official craft beer of IU Athletics, Hoosier Gameday Lager, brought to you by Upland Brewing Company. Had a few of those at the game yesterday, and it was a nice compliment to watching IU go out there and gradually put a chokehold on the Maryland Terrapins. Hoosier Gameday Lager, a delightfully balanced Vienna-style lager, a lot more flavor and balance than what you'll get in a lot of those adjunct lagers that are served on other taps. Or cans for that matter. You can get Hoosier Gameday Lager all across Memorial Stadium, anywhere you buy alcohol within Central and Southern Indiana, as well as Upland's many locations throughout Central and Southern Indiana. Again, Hoosier Gameday Lager in the iconic candy-striped can. Make sure to pick up a six-pack for your next football viewing adventure. Please remember to drink responsibly. Again, Hoosier Gameday Lager from Upland Brewing Company.
And with our next game being a road game, I was at Upland on Friday. I highly recommend the Pig and the Fig. It's a great like burger with a nice like fig spread on it. I axe the arugula because that's the way I roll. But with our next road game, Saturday being a game 3:30 at Northwestern. If you're not going up there, go to one of their locations. They have a great one here in Clay Terrace in Westfield, and like enjoy the Hoosier Gameday Lager with a little bit of food, watching the game with your closest friends at Upland.
How can you remove the arugula? You're like a savage.
I'm not a rabbit. It's just not adding it. It's like
arugula is amazing. I refuse to stand by for arugula.
Lettuce is great on a burger or a sandwich.
Iceberg lettuce
is like
Come on, man. Arugula's got soul. Come on. It's
it has soul, but it doesn't taste good on a burger.
It's amazing. It tastes amazing on a burger.
Yeah,
Actually,
it tastes like little sticks and straws. Like it's too much. No,
tastes amazing on pizza as well. But we'll get back to that.
God, that's a heresy. Well, maybe I'm buying generic arugula. I don't think Upland has it, but maybe because you hate generic chips. Maybe I need
artisan
version, artisan arugula.
Artisan arugula. That's
do an arugula tailgate. See who shows up.
That's Scott and I's off the books indie band, Artisan Arugula.
Dude, great band name.
Playing at the Hi-Fi this weekend in Indianapolis. Anyway, also just a reminder, folks, we're on Substack. Hit us up at crimsoncast.substack.com. It's free to sign up. You get our podcasts delivered right to your inbox. You can avoid the messiness of going to social media to get them. We also have a VIP option. We occasionally provide extra videos. It's mostly there if you want to help support the podcast financially, which does help keep the lights on. We do appreciate it. Podcasting is cheap, but it ain't free. So we appreciate any support. And we really appreciate all of the folks that have subscribed, over 1,000 people now as part of the Crimson Cast Substack army, getting our podcast updates on a regular basis. And so we would encourage you to sign up for free, and we'd love to have you in the community. So again, crimsoncast.substack.com. All right, Scott, let's dive right into it, as Indiana with another decisive victory in the Big Ten. I could get used to this. I really, really could. The Hoosiers 42-28 victors over the Maryland Terrapins. We went into this game and it almost went exactly the opposite of how I thought it might go, because before the game, I'm thinking, well, I think Indiana is the superior team, not by an immense margin, but enough that, I was comfortable with the 7-point spread. And I thought, well, this is an IU team that's probably going to come out and really establish themselves early, get an early lead, not dissimilar to what happened in the UCLA game. And then, maybe there's a little fighting back by Maryland later on. It almost went the exact opposite of that, where neither team could get a foothold in this game. It was really back and forth for almost the entire first half, and really even into the first part of the second half. But Indiana, despite shooting itself in the foot on multiple occasions, really put their stamp on the game in the second half and went from a 21-21 tie game to a 42-28 victory over the span of basically the last quarter and a half. The defense really deserves most of the plaudits for keeping Indiana in this game early on, as the offense continued to make mistakes. But then the offense really got into a stride as we went into that second half. And, you look at the statistics afterwards and you say to yourself, well, this looked like another really dominant performance from Indiana in terms of offense, and yet it didn't feel like Indiana was a dominant offensive team until the very end of the game, essentially. One of those games where Indiana acted with a maturity and an unflappability that I am just simply not used to seeing out of IU football teams. Scott, what were your initial impressions of how this game went?
Yeah, it did not start off well. I mean, here, the high-level takeaway for me is this. We had 4 turnovers in the game. Our first 6 drives included 3 turnovers, 2 interceptions, back-to-back interceptions. We had a fumble and 2 punts and 1 touchdown in our first 6 drives. Maryland had that they had a one-play 75-yard touchdown drive. They had that one big play that always seems to happen against us. A lot of the breaks went toward Maryland. In that play, unfortunately, a referee got bumped into an IU player, which kind of helped open the hole. That's a bummer. They had that play in the end zone. Great catch, like a tip ball. The tight end tipped it back to himself, caught it. The point is, all of those Waffles is fired up. It wouldn't be Crimson Cast without a dog freaking out. Hold on my door. Grayson, open. This is. There you go. Now close the door. That's awesome. All right, that's my son. Sorry, it's Crimson Cast. They're listening to the script.
Correct.
All of those things happened, and we still won by 14, which is unbelievable. Like in any other game that we've had, even the good seasons that we've had, those kinds of things happen in games where it's like, well, we would have this podcast like, Galen, things are going well, but this was about as bad as, everything, all systems failure. You're going to chalk it up to just, hey, man, that was a bad day for everybody. Not only did we win by 14, we never trailed. I was thinking this in the third quarter, we never really relinquished control of the steering wheel. I think we went up 28-21, and then Maryland immediately had that 75-yard touchdown. But, other seasons, we would have gone 3 and out and had Maryland kick a field goal. It's you lose, then suddenly you're now you're coming from behind. by the way, we've never trailed the season. Like, just think about that. But to me, that's the high level takeaway is felt like we could have won by 21 or 28. We still won by 14 against a good Maryland team. And we didn't play even close to our best, but we were able to make adjustments, make changes. But through all of that, again, it's like we just never lost our grip on the steering wheel. And this is something that I'm going to mention many times in this podcast. There's something different here. Like, it's just, there is something different here. You can feel it in the game, in the stands, the way this team plays. Like, you can see it in the numbers, you can see it in the wins, but even just kind of somebody who's watched football for 30 years, watched IU football for 30 plus years, it's something is changing for the positive.
Yeah, it absolutely feels like there's just a different aura around this team when it's on the field. And that, it really is starting to get into the crowd. I think there was clearly a hesitancy on the part of some people to get too excited during the Charlotte game or even show up for the Charlotte game because it was just perceived as a lesser opponent. And look, I was a little upset at the beginning with the crowd yesterday because it wasn't as full as I would have liked to have seen it. But by the time everything filled in and the students got all the way in there, which took about until the 5-minute mark of the first quarter, that was a really nice crowd. And the way that the crowd responded to the team was indicative of the difference in vibe and the difference in aura. There's this flow right now where you keep waiting. If you're an IU fan that's been watching football for a while, you keep waiting for that other shoe to drop. You keep waiting for the bottom to fall out and for IU to panic. It looked at the beginning, those 2 interceptions that Curtis Rourke threw, the first one I didn't think was that big of a deal. I think it was just a misread. The second one was just a bad throw. And I was right in line with it. And we're looking around and like, oh God, here we go. But, not just the defense responding and essentially rising to the occasion while the offense sorted itself out and while Rourke got himself back to where he needed to be, but also the offense not getting so down on itself that it starts making silly mistakes, which has always been what's happened with IU football. Like, even in the good years, when things start to go wrong, it's like the whole thing just starts to fall apart. And I think we talked about this a little bit after the UCLA game as well, but it feels like Cignetti and Brian Haynes and Mike Shanahan and Tino Sunseri, like this whole group has instilled this level of calm and perspective in the way that the team operates, where they just don't freak out. And look, there are programs that do that on a regular basis and have for years. It's not necessarily a unicorn kind of thing, but it does feel so unusual given how up and down IU football's been for as long as we can remember. To have this type of a game start the way that it did, go the way that it did, and have IU come away not just with a victory, but with a decisive victory. I think that's like a 99% post-game win percentage. It's rarefied air for IU football in general. It feels like an undiscovered country for this program at this point.
It's something you and I have been talking about all season because we're lifelong IU football fans. We have that history of like, we're waiting. We keep saying we're waiting for the other shoe to drop, for the anvil to fall. Like, all right, here's the moment where we fall apart. And, I was thinking about this on the drive home from the game. They were talking about, just the influx of JMU players. And it got me thinking, it's not the best comp because these teams both won titles. But like, you think of the early 2000s Red Sox, they had, those teams had so much built up. And a lot of those teams, the Boston fan base would get so, pressured. And obviously they were good teams, but it's like you had just a bunch of guys like Kevin Millar and Johnny Damon who just didn't care. It's like they're just dudes who just go out there and play. And Manny Ramirez was like an ultimate, just like he didn't get the pressure because he was just at halftime, didn't know where he was playing. You think of the Cubs, like there's a ton of pressure on the Cubs. And then you get this team of like, Rizzo and just a bunch of guys who are like, hey man, like who cares? Like you have a very kind of unconventional manager. And this can happen. You can have a bunch of people come in. And I'm thinking of the JMU players and just the change of culture where it's like, it just, they don't buy into that old IU, here comes the anvil. And it's like, they're so just from a different mindset and it doesn't even phase them and it doesn't even pick up on it. And, maybe it's just the guys like you and me who are just the ones thinking of it. And the team and the students are just like, hey, we've only been here for 18 months. Like, I don't know what you're talking about. The team's sucking. It's like, 4 years ago, we were ranked in the top 10. We should be. And so I was thinking about the Red Sox and the Cubs as kind of somewhat, analogs of this, where it's just, you get a bunch of guys who are just like, hey man, we're not even going to engage in that nonsense.
Right. Well, look, a lot of it is program mindset. And we've talked a lot about how, Kevin Wilson's teams oftentimes, like, they were great play designs. It was a really intelligent approach from a coaching perspective in terms of straight X's and O's, but that team really seemed to struggle with consistency, and a lot of that felt like it could be attributed to leadership and the way that the team was coached and managed. Allen's teams, when they accomplished great things, there was generally a lot of emotion involved, except for that 2019 season when the entire Alabama coaching staff was in charge. And, and you could see there, it's like, wow, there's some great tactical stuff. But you think about, like,
we also had a top 10 quarterback, NFL quarterback. Yeah.
For part of the season. Yes.
Yeah.
But the point is, like, those
coaching staff. It's true. It's wild to think about. Yeah.
Those approaches, I think both of those approaches were limited. And I'll note that, like, IU and what they're doing right now, they're doing it with a talent level that is probably less than either of those teams had in terms of, like, recruiting rankings and things like that. And you mentioned all the JMU transfers, but it's also all of these kind of mid-tier transfers from Power 5 schools. I'm just fascinated, again, week after week, and I think even more so after this game, about how this coaching staff has managed to bring all of these different folks together, get them on the same page, and have them not panic when things don't go their way. Because it includes players that were on the team last year for Indiana who did tend to panic when things didn't go their way. That's
get guys to pick different roles. Like, you have Donovan McCulley, I think, played one snap the entire game, and he caught a touchdown. And he looks super. I mean, obviously everyone's happy when they score a touchdown, but it's like getting guys to play their roles, where Donovan McCulley was a big pickup this offseason and could have come in this year with, like, hey man, you needed me. Like, I was getting big offers. Like, this ain't good enough. We're not there day to day, but he had one play, seemed very happy to have his, like, knew his role. And that is the sign of a very functional football team, where you have guys playing different roles than maybe what they thought, but being very, playing them at a very high level and being happy to play those roles.
Yeah, I mean, I just keep coming back to the turnover mark and how impressive it was. I mean, Matt Blaska, who's, an extended member of the Crimson Cast pod family, noted, I've watched a lot of bad football in my life. I can't recall a team being -4 in turnovers and never really feeling like they were in danger of losing. And it really did feel that way. I mean, there were moments where you expected maybe it would go downhill just based upon history, but then Indiana would go back out and almost immediately correct course and figure out a way to bring things back to where it at least looked neutral in nature.
The other thing too that something we've talked about in this podcast ad nauseum for years is it always felt like IU has had this problem where they would get one side of the ball humming. It's like, all right, we got offense going, and then defense would just completely crap out. And it's like, then they get the defense set up, and then offense would go 3 and out, or fumble or punt. It was noted a lot in the post game on all 4 of those turnovers. Maryland went 3 and out, and the one they didn't, they went 4 and out. Like, our defense immediately locked in and stepped up when they had to. And it's like they're working together, which is really nice to see. And obviously you'd love a 3 and out every single time. That's not going to obviously happen every single game in the Big Ten, but you can see it's like, all right, they ratcheted it up. It's like, all right, we know that, hey, we got to pick up the other side. And now's the time we got to do that. And it didn't, in previous years, that doesn't happen. Like, that's where both sides kind of system failure. That was really nice to see. It's like, all right, man, our offense is not doing well. Our defense is going to really lock in and 3 and out and get you another shot at it.
I think, to me, as I look back on the game, there were a bunch of really key sequences in the game. But to me, the key sequence happens, Indiana takes the 14-7 lead at halftime. That was a really, really important drive where, Indiana 3 plays, 63 yards, and, essentially they jumpstart their offense to the point where they're able to go out and take a 14-7 lead. And it was kind of perfectly set up, I think, for IU to be able to go in, and the coaches could say, well, look, we're leading, but we played about as bad as we could play. And then you look at the sequence that happens as they come out of halftime. Maryland gets their best drive of the whole game, a 10-play, 75-yard drive. They look like they just carved right through the IU defense. They tie it up at 14. Indiana comes back, 7-play, 75-yard drive, takes 2 minutes and 21 seconds. Now they're back up by 7. Then Maryland has the play where they get the block from the umpire, on the very next drive, one play, 75 yards, 10 seconds. It's 21-21, and you're just kind of like, uh-oh. Maryland looks like it's going to be able to match Indiana punch for punch in this second half. But then this next sequence is what I'm getting at. Indiana, I think I'd forgotten this. They go out and they 3 and out on the next drive.
Yeah.
3 plays, 4 yards, they have to punt. But then the defense comes out and they 3 and out Maryland. Now, some of that had to do with, there was even an offsides there. Like, Indiana had a self-inflicted penalty, but they're able to force Maryland into a mistake. They have to punt.
Indiana 3 and out with -5 yards.
Yeah. So then Indiana comes back out, 9 plays, 63 yards, touchdown. Then Maryland down 7, 3 and out. They have to punt. Indiana, 5 plays, 65 yards, touchdown. Maryland, 12 plays, 45 yards, turnover on downs. Even with Indiana fumbling on the next drive as they're driving in, they're able to, again, force Maryland out on downs on the next drive, and then they score a touchdown, and the game is essentially over at 42-21. That sequence right there, like, it's almost like Indiana was like lying in wait, waiting for everything to kind of consolidate at the same time and at the same point, and suddenly both the offense and defense are playing their best ball at the same time in the game. And Maryland, I think, deserves a lot of credit. That was the best defense Indiana has played so far. That was an aggressive, physical defense. They made it very difficult for Indiana to run, and it showed in Indiana's post-game EPA on the running side. But Indiana did a nice job of essentially taking what Maryland gave them, and once they settled down offensively, figuring out how to take advantage in the passing game. And on the defensive side, the aggression with which Indiana was playing defense and the way they made it difficult on most drives, not every single one, but on most drives for Maryland to do what they wanted to do, was just really impressive. And again, there's just like a resiliency with this team and the way that they approach things that I think is encapsulated in that sequence there in the third quarter, heading over into the fourth quarter. It's one thing to do that early in the game. That's what they did against UCLA. To do that late in the game in not ideal weather conditions against an opponent that has looked more or less equal to you in most phases throughout the course of the game up to that point, that's really special, Scott. Like, I have a real hard time remembering a lot of games where Indiana did something like that over the course of a third and fourth quarter against a team like Maryland.
Yeah, well, preparing for this, I also wrote down my key sequence, and that was it. So I'm gonna let you just let that. I'm not gonna try and step on perfection. So I completely agree with you. But I will say this: that, you're right. It happened a little earlier in the UCLA game, but it kind of happened based on UCLA just not being ready. Like, it's 14-0 in that UCLA game before you know it. But as we talked about, after halftime, again, third quarter, it's when UCLA scored that touchdown, and it wasn't as tight. This was a tied game. But IU did the same thing in that UCLA game where, they score, they hold UCLA to 2 long drives, like, field goal, IU score, and then it's like it's completely blown out. And this is kind of becoming the MO of this team, which is awesome, of like, we're going to play at a certain level, but then almost be like a cobra that'll strike. And like, at some point, we are going to just constrict on defense and come at you on offense. And like, there's going to be this 8-minute stretch where we're going to just win the game. And they did it in the UCLA game twice, and they did it in this Maryland game in that sequence you just talked about. And it is really special to be like, there was that moment when Maryland got that long score to make it 21-all, where I'm like, man, like, this is going to be a nail biter. Like, it's going to be fun, but it's going to be. And then at the end of the game, I'm like, wow, we have 5 minutes to go and we have this thing in the bag. Like, it's just how quickly you go from one to the other is really amazing. But it's also, I think, a testament to just the mentality and the psyche of this team, where they don't get too high and they definitely don't get too low. You have to give it up to the offense and Curtis Rourke. They started out awful, and they just did. And Rourke was still kind of missing guys throughout the game. Like, he did not have a good game, but he turned it. What he did have was a great game, and that he was able to realize, like, all right, it's still not over. Like, I don't need to freak out. And they were able to pull things together. And what I thought was really cool was they didn't just abandon the pass. Rourke wasn't having a great day through 2 interceptions. Some other coaches might be like, all right, we just got to run the ball. Like, all right, we're just done throwing. It's like, they didn't do that. And they didn't even stop throwing long. Like, they really were just like, hey, this is our game plan. And it felt like he just told Rourke, like, you're good. Like, we're still going to run it. You're fine. And it's also amazing. Like, I think of that Donovan McCulley play. You know, you mentioned how there were great play designs in the Wilson era. There's some great play designs here because
Oh God,
a lot of those, like, there are guys wide open all over the field a lot of times. It's unbelievable how open they're able to get guys with these play calls.
Taylor Lehman from Bite Size Bison sent me.
You said it first. You win the bet this week.
He sent me a little note earlier this morning. Indiana owns the top 4 wide receivers in EPA per target in the whole conference. That is a combination of great play calling, great play design, and also just having some dudes. I mean, one of the things that I've found so amazing, you mentioned McCulley, who, 1 catch for a touchdown. You'll take that. McCulley's almost become like a luxury item that you use in particular situations. And you think about, like, it's such a diverse and talented wide receiver room. But there's 2 that are clearly separating themselves from the pack right now. One of them is Elijah Surratt, and the other one is Omar Cooper Jr.
Yeah.
Both of those guys are just such fascinating receivers. Surratt is just it's hard to explain because he's fast, but he's also he's sizable. He's a guy who you feel comfortable with running a pattern on because he can get open, he can move in the open field. Omar Cooper's really coming into his own. But to be able to have McCulley out there, to be able to have Miles Price or Miles Cross, you get all these different changeups with these different players.
Keyshawn Wilson with also, Williams, 3 touchdowns.
Absolutely. So it's the idea of this team is well disciplined, but they also have great play calling. And even and I think defense, the same thing. Like what you're seeing on defense, the amount of penetration that IU was able to get against Maryland. You think about it, and it's like the 1 touchdown that Maryland scored in the first half was entirely just the product of a mistake by Indiana, because prior to that they had Maryland at like 2nd and 31 or something like that because of all of the pressure that they were getting. That, the big question mark and the big concern most people have is the secondary at this point with IU, but having a front 7 that can put the kind of pressure on that this Indiana team is able to, I like the fact that that is a possibility that you can move forward on. And what I mean by that is, like, IU's probably not at the point yet where you could say, hey, they're going to be great in all phases of the defense. And certainly I think there's going to be teams that'll really, really focus on the passing game to try to take advantage of some of the potential problems that Indiana might have in the secondary. But realistically speaking, Indiana's ability to get pressure, to bottle up the run, these are things that are likely to travel really well over the course of the season. And I'm just really impressed with, again, how this coaching staff has been able to not just use the talent that they've got effectively, but also the overall design that they've had, and most of the game planning they've had against all of their opponents so far has been very, very difficult for their opponents to deal with. Scott, somebody noted this in the post game, and I forget who it was. Like, Indiana so far this season, like, the team that's held them on offense to the fewest points is FIU. And that was the first game of the season. It was a game where Indiana was clearly not showing a lot of their hand, but was also trying to figure out some rhythm things. And I think we came out of that FIU game thinking, well, that's not going to be good enough this season. They have gotten progressively better, I think, if you factor in competition level every game in terms of how they're running plays on offense, and the way that their defense has been able to move around and figure out how to find angles for penetration to try to both disrupt the passing game and the running game. It's just a really exciting stew of things that we've seen so far. And if you were waiting, or if you were thinking, well, gosh, they just haven't played against very good competition, you can't say Maryland wasn't good competition. I mean, Maryland was, I think, top 35 or top 40 in S&P Plus coming in. Yes, this was a home game, but that's a Maryland team that is got a lot of talent. Is a team that, I as much talk about Tagovailoa leaving and Billy Edwards coming in as quarterback. He looked like a really good quarterback for them. I think they're going to have a lot of success with him. And I think that that's a Maryland team that'll spring an upset or two down the stretch this season. Indiana doing what they did against that Maryland team and pulling away like that, it's really a testament to the scouting and the longevity that the game plan has for Indiana right now. And I think that's something that travels as well as you go through the rest of the schedule for IU.
So the first thing is, I know Taylor listens to the podcast. Taylor, send me some info Sunday morning before the pod. Like, just you're feeding Galen all this great stuff. Like, hook a brother up. Like once every 3, I expect something. Taylor, calling you out, bro. I expect some kind of great nugget.
Taylor, whatever he puts on the table, I'll match and add $1. Okay, just to let you know.
I'm gonna add an Upland wheat. I'm gonna add 1 Upland cream and crimson wheat, and maybe an unmarked home field promo code. No, the 2 things I will say, like on the defensive side, you are right. The secondary is something that has to be, and we're not going to become a top 1 defense in the Big Ten overnight. But you're right about the pressure in that. In previous years, our secondary was a problem, but we also couldn't pressure the quarterback. So then the quarterback just had all the day and all the time in the world to then pick apart that secondary. I think it's, the fact that we're able to pressure the quarterback the way that we are, and that front line is doing as well as it is, that kind of helps some of the secondary. And, this is where you have to give the coaching staff credit. They probably understand that. Like, all right, we've got to focus more on schemes that provide more pressure because we know our secondary can't, cover as well as we want. So that's where we got to put that pressure. To the offensive side, what kind of I thought about on the way home as well was, the first couple of games, you and I were talking about the rushing and how good the rushing attack is. And we kept saying, it looks like this team is holding a lot of things back. And they are, but they we had 359 passing yards in the game against Maryland, 151 rushing yards. When they needed plays, they definitely went to the pass. But Galen, this is still a rushing offense after 5 games that is averaging 5.2 yards a rush every single time they do a rushing play. It's still like in a weird way, you still have this great running game kind of on the back end. And we saw it against UCLA. It's obviously what other teams are scouting because they came in trying to all out stop the run and we're able to carve them up with the passing. And as guys are getting wide open, it makes you wonder as you go along this season, this is kind of into the, we're playing chess now. Are other teams going to start trying to stop the passing game, which will open our run back up? And that's something where it's like, I don't think I've ever, even in our best days, remembered an IU team where it's like we have both things humming. Even in the 2020 season, it's like, all right, this is a lot on Penix. Like there's a lot of play calling on Penix here. In the Wilson era, it was like a lot on the run. It was all Tevin Coleman and run guys. Like I don't ever remember a team where it's like if they start stopping the pass, we have a really good running attack. If they start stopping the run, we have a really good passing attack. It's Galen, it's amazing we're here. Where we were 9 months, it is unbelievable that we're here where we were 9 months ago.
Looking at some of the standout statistical performers, as much as Curtis Rourke got a little bit of criticism for 2 interceptions early on, still finished 22 of 33, 359 yards, 3 touchdowns. I mean, it's just like, that's wild. It really is. Yeah. Indiana with, again, this running back broom, this 3-headed beast that they have. It was Tyson Lawton's day in terms of the yardage, 19 carries, 93 yards. Justice Ellison, 12 carries, 51 yards. Both of those guys had a touchdown. And then you look at the receiving room. We mentioned Surratt, 7 catches, 128 yards and a touchdown. Omar Cooper Jr., 4 catches, 83 yards and a touchdown. And even some great individual moments that, maybe there weren't huge statistical outlays, but we mentioned the Donovan McCulley touchdown that kind of sealed things for IU. Zach Horton with an incredible catch on the goal line. But, Horton did so much great work with his blocking throughout the course of the game, his run blocking. We talked about that last week. Like he is really, really impressive in terms of his ability to contribute in both phases of the game. Another game where Aiden Fisher leads the team in tackles, 12 tackles, 5 of those solo. D'Angelo Pons coming back, playing a full game after being suspended for the first half against Charlotte. 10 tackles, 7 of those solo. Just again, a rotating collection of the defense going in there and performing when they need to. It was really exciting watching Indiana.
Block.
Go ahead. What?
Special teams punt block.
Yeah, that was exactly where I was going. Like it was. No, it's fine. Like it was exciting seeing Indiana special teams having to do something for a change. They didn't have to kick a field goal in this game, but James Evans, 4 punts, 47-yard per punt average, including a 58-yard long punt and 2 punts inside the 20. And then, of course, you mentioned the punt block. And really, Indiana was pretty good in the return game as well. I mean, Miles Price had 3 punt returns. That was, the all 10.7 average on those. You'll take that most of the time. Again, just a really, really good collective effort by this Indiana team. And, look, ultimately they got a little bit fortunate in that there were problems with Ty Felton. I think he went out with a concussion or something like that earlier on in the game. He only ended up with 5 catches for 38 yards. I say only, but they really contained him well. And they kept Maryland from kind of breaking out in general. They hold Maryland to 3.7 yards per rush. Maryland deserves a lot of credit because they held Indiana to 3.6 yards per rush. But the difference is Indiana scored 3 times on the ground, and whereas Maryland only was able to go for 289 yards passing with 11 yards per attempt, 11 yards per completion, Indiana, 359 yards through the passing game, 16.3 yards per completion, and 3 touchdowns. So, looking at the numbers and looking at the statistics, it's really amazing. I mean, Curtis Rourke is clearly the person who is the key to the offense in terms of the distributions. But the fact that the supporting cast both keeps rotating in terms of who's making contributions, but also you're starting to see some patterns settle in where Surratt and Cooper are the go-to kind of lead receivers, but you've got these other receivers that Rourke's been able to sprinkle in. The fact that the running back room seems so democratically oriented in that the contributions are coming from all over the place. It just feels like Indiana's in a really good spot right now in terms of having come together and figured out how they're supposed to perform as a team. And you mentioned like the blue sky aspects when we talked last week about this middle portion of the schedule. Maryland, Northwestern, Nebraska, Washington, Michigan State. And I guess maybe you could throw Michigan in now, given their statistical performances. They only win by 3 at home versus Minnesota yesterday. Like all of these games, all of them now, all the remainders, Indiana is favored at least via FPI, which means they'll be almost certainly favored on the betting line. And when you think about the fact that we looked at the statistical analyses and it said Maryland was probably going to be the toughest game out of those games to win this decisively and to feel like you probably should have won by, you should have put 55 or 60 points up on the board. Cignetti even mentioned that in his post-game comments. You're not trying to get greedy, but it's like Indiana underperformed in terms of execution, overperformed in terms of statistical analysis, probably should have won by more. As much as we try to hold ourselves back, Scott, it really is one of those things where you're looking at this team and looking the road in front. If they can execute at this level, if they can maintain this consistency, the sky does really feel like it's kind of the limit for this IU team. And it feels like I'm going to get punished for saying that by some cosmic force, but it does feel like the trajectory is about as positive as it could be at this point. Like, I don't know how Indiana would have played this first 5 games any better than what they've played them up to this point.
Agreed on all of that. I'll kind of just continue on that same theme. This game started in kind of the way that I used to joke. It's like, this is how I would, when I was playing I don't do it as much, but when I was younger playing NCAA football, it's like, this would be the start where it's just like, I'm restarting the game. Like, I'm just turning off turning off my PlayStation, taking the disc out, putting it back in, and just like, we're restarting that. Like, that was the computer wanting me to lose. That's the way this game started. And to your point, when you look forward, the other games, you're playing a road game at Northwestern, which is a very funky stadium. It's not a traditionally tough road environment. The other road game is at Michigan State after they're going to have gone through a brutal stretch. I think they play like 2 or 3 more. Like, they could be on a 5-game losing streak where that's a tough place to play, but they could just have all of their soul ripped out by that point. And then the other 3 games are at home, Nebraska, Washington, and Michigan. And again, this is probably the worst weather you could assume for a game like this. And so, the crowds this will have an even better home field advantage for those 3 future games than you had here. Everything was conspiring for Indiana to lose this game. And it's not just that we could have won by more. We played bad. I mean, we just didn't play great for, I don't want to say long stretches, but for stretches of this game. And we still won by 14, Galen. It's wild, and I'm with you. Like, it is the idea of 10-0 going into that Michigan game. It's almost heresy to say as a pod. Like, I'm just waiting for us to be like shut down as a podcast.
I mean, I will note your broadcasting board actually shut down on you before we started the podcast. So maybe we've already seen this. I just want to note.
Yeah, like Spotify is like doing the transcript. It's like, oh, IU 10 and 0, like, like that's not. But it's like any other team would look at this and just be like, that makes like that's the way it should go, and that's the way it's going to go. It's wild.
Here's the thing. I am so tired of not enjoying my football team because of some feeling like I'm not supposed to be able to, or that I'm supposed to get like an anvil supposed to drop on my head while I'm walking down the sidewalk. It's okay to just be giddy. If you look around the country, football team fan bases do not constrain themselves when their teams are playing well. Right. You apologize afterwards. You act braggadocious while it's happening. It's okay. We can do that as a group. Let's work on this together. Let's work on just being ridiculously optimistic. It's funny, like even after the game yesterday, there were still people that were making comments on social media like, well, I've seen stuff like this before. And it's like, well, first of all, no, you have not. You have not seen Indiana play at this level before. You have not. I'm sorry, even if you were alive for 67, Indiana was not this dominant in 1967 through their first 5 games. You have not seen these performances by an Indiana football team before. And I understand the idea that it could all fall apart. We almost saw it fall apart in the first half versus Maryland. But it's okay to be irrationally optimistic about your college football team. Indiana right now is one of the best stories in college football. They're getting some of the best performances from a variety of players in college football, not just their quarterback, not just their star on defense, but their wide receivers. The offensive line play has been understatedly really, really good all season. Indiana over the last 4 games has scored a ridiculous number of points. You know, I cannot emphasize this enough. Indiana on the season has scored 31, 77, 42, 52, and 42 points. Those are, as you would often say, Scott, those are video game numbers. Those are things that we have not seen Indiana do to start a season. And their
game, I think we scored more touchdowns than every other team except for Texas.
And I'll note, Indiana in the 5 games they played has allowed 7 points, 3 points, 13 points, 14 points, and 28 points in a rainstorm, essentially. It wasn't really a rainstorm, but it rained all game. After their offense gave up 4 turnovers, they only allowed 28 points in a game against a live Big Ten team that's probably going to go to a bowl game at the end of the season. So it's okay to be optimistic. It's okay to be having fun with this. And I understand where people are hesitant to do so, but I would say we may never get a season like this in the next 20 years. Like sometimes things just cosmically happen and things come together. And one of the comments I keep seeing from people who are not IU fans is like, wow, you guys seem to have caught lightning in a bottle. And that is exactly how it feels to me. It feels like it's different than even 2019, which was, a great season by any stretch of the imagination. It was a season where it felt like a bunch of things came together. That came together pretty slow. It really wasn't until the end of October that you felt like Indiana had really come together as a team. It feels like they've come together as a team right now. It feels like they're not satisfied even with the good performances they've put in. Just embrace this. These feelings don't come around that often, and they don't often last. Like sometimes you only get these feelings for a month, but it ending at some point is not a valid excuse for not feeling the feelings in the first place.
I'm going to quote you on X. I'm just going to read this out because it was perfect. This is Galen. That was probably one of the most fun IU football games I've ever attended. The weather, the vibe, the way the team played, the crowd getting further and further into it as the game went along, just perfect. I just want to end the pod on that. Like that was, it's so well said. I stayed for my wife, my 2 kids, we were there, stayed for the entire game. And I completely agree with you. For those who were there, and there was a lot of people were there. A lot of people stayed. Yep. I said it multiple times. And I keep like, if you were there, it's like, first off, I think we all like experienced something very cool, but also it's like, I kept telling my wife, like, it feels like something is changing. Like this just feels different. Like the way the team is playing, the way the crowd is reacting. I do have a thought on the crowd, but the way the crowd is reacting, the way the students started chanting, like, we took like, who's your daddy? It's like, all right, like we'll take that, we'll own it, like, and throw it back on you. I'm like, that's great. Like the students were electric. Like they were fired up. All the rest of the fans were fired up. I mean, it was loud. People who were there stayed, and you just like, it's like, this is like being forged in the fire almost. And I walked away from that being like, this feels way different. We're walking out of Memorial Stadium. People are singing the fight song and, chanting IU. And it's like something just, and again, nobody lived through 2020. Unfortunately, nobody was there. So we didn't get to see that. We all kind of did that virtually. 2019, like you said, was a fun season. I never felt like things are systematically changing. Like this just feels so different. And if you were there, I think it's hard to walk away being like, that felt like every other IU normal win. Like there was something really different in that win, the way the students are galvanizing around this, the letters Signetti sent to the students, both the night before and the day after. Like I echo everything you said, and I will just come back to like something is changing and something is really happening here. Does that mean we're going to become the best team ever? No. Does that mean we're going to be undefeated? No. But like, it feels like this is the change we've been looking for years. But that was a unbelievable football experience. It was awesome.
Yeah, I got a little teary-eyed towards the end of it a couple of times, which sounds goofy, but it's true. I mean, it was like after the McCulley touchdown, where you knew the game was essentially over, and just the loudness of the crowd and the joy in the stadium and the fun that people were having. It just was like, this is what you've always wanted Memorial Stadium to feel like, and it's been very rare that it's felt that way, even in big wins. I mean, everybody always points back to the Michigan game in 1987, that game in the rain where Indiana wins 14-10. And that was certainly, whether you were there or whether you've watched that game on television, like that was a really special moment, clearly. There haven't been a whole lot of games like that in Memorial Stadium where Indiana played a game that mattered, that people knew mattered, that was really important to the program building towards something, where Indiana played well for the majority of the game and then came away with the victory, and the crowd was just really fully into it. I've gone back and looked at prior games. I mean, most of the games that I can remember having the most joy watching with Indiana have been games that were really close. I mean, the Wisconsin game last year, that was a fun game. Indiana won. It was great to beat Wisconsin. But it was a game that was really touch and go. And it was like you got to the middle of the fourth quarter, like, what, they might pull this off. That's not the feeling that I'm talking about in the stadium. This was a stadium where, as you got through that first quarter, like a lot of IU crowds would have gotten backed off of their marks because of the way that the game was going. It was almost like it went the opposite direction. It was largely because
Kurt like started like helping him out. And
but it was also the way the defense got the crowd fired up. And it's the way that the players, after making big plays, were running into the end zone and kind of pumping the crowd up, particularly the student section. That moment at the end of the game where the teams come together as the gun goes off, and the players start running over to the students and start, jumping up in front of them. Like, that's the kind of organic building that you're talking about, where you get people invested. And we talked about this for so long, Scott. Like, the as much as I've been a critic of certain aspects of the IU fan base with football, I've also said over and over again in the whole 15, 16 years we've been doing this podcast, it is not particularly fair to expect fans to show up in a vacuum and be loud and excited. You have to give them reasons to be supportive. You have to give them an emotional bond. It's what made IU basketball on the men's side so successful for so long, because you would go to Assembly Hall and there would be special moments that would happen, even if the overall season didn't necessarily go the way that you wanted it to at the end, oftentimes, though it did. It's what's made Indiana women's basketball so successful and so popular among so many people, because you go watch Indiana women's basketball and they deliver more often than not, especially at home. This is the kind of game, the kind of performance, the kind of emotion that causes people to say, wow, that was incredible fun. That was something that I want to get more emotionally invested in. That is what is going to help build a culture around IU football. It's not slogans. It's not marketing approaches. It's not, oh, we hired this guy, so therefore you have to go out and support him. It's games like this and performances like this and experiences like this that make people say, I cannot wait to go back to a Memorial Stadium and cheer this team on again. And that was what made me the most emotional, because for those students, and the young alumni, like the number of people who after the game said something along the lines of, I've never experienced anything like that before with IU football. Now you have. And, what's exciting to me is that this team's poised and positioned to be able to provide that on more than one occasion down the line, especially in this month of October. You've got two immense games. You got this Northwestern game, obviously, but that's a road game. It's a little bit of a different circumstance, but you've got two immense games coming up on the home schedule in the middle of October. Weather's going to be perfect. And that what Indiana was able to build out of this Maryland game, if that can connect to the Nebraska game and then connect to the Washington game, that's where this season could go to a truly special level. I am fascinated to see not just how it goes on the team side, but how the fans continue to react to what this team is doing.
Agreed. Like hard stop, agreed, all that. The one thing that I was thinking about that is needed, and this is where it's great with IU football because so much of the culture is a blank slate. We went to the Rose Bowl game.
We did.
Between the third and fourth quarter, they play California by Tupac, and they do some cool stuff with the lights. Like, it's a cool feature. You go to Assembly Hall, there is, obviously the flag timeout, the under 8 flag timeout. Not that you go there for that, but it's like, you have something in the second half to kind of, as a fan, to kind of, a fun little thing to, an Easter egg. Wisconsin has Jump Around by House of Pain. We tried the flags for a while at the Memorial Stadium between the third and the fourth quarter. This year it's like they're playing "We Will Rock You" by Queen with like a picture of Hep Rocks. Like there's a moment there. Like you now have like that's a spot where now that people are staying and are going to stay, like you have a good moment there to do something. And it was kind of funny because like we started the fourth quarter, the fans like everyone does this the fans were kind of like whoa, like getting fired, like we got it, like fourth quarter, and then it's just like, all right, here's Queen, "We Will Rock You." It's like the kind of cheering, like there's a moment there. Like there's some, I don't know what it is, but we could do something there that becomes a signature something to be done there. And it's not singing "We Will Rock You" by Queen.
Well, look, I think these things grow organically. We see these things in other stadiums and they've evolved over time. And I think there's some trial and error involved in it. It's tough to do. Like, we were watching the Alabama-Georgia game last night, or you're watching, what was the other game? It was the Penn State game. And it's like, it's hard to do the cool light thing with the sound at noon. We kind of get screwed by the kickoff time. Like, I would love to see this team playing a primetime game in Memorial Stadium at some point. Just to
happen this year?
Maybe. We'll come back to that in a second. But I will say, you're skipping what has been consistently like the best tradition in Memorial Stadium, which is the students singing "Don't Stop Believin'." It's almost taking a different turn now from a meaning perspective. Maybe we're building something off of Journey. I'm not entirely certain, but I was sitting next to my buddy Dave, who came down from Chicagoland for the game. He had a great time, by the way. He thought the atmosphere was electric, but he was really taken aback at how everybody in the stadium knew all the lyrics to that song. And I'm like, yeah, I know. It's kind of inexplicable. I'm not sure if you can build around that song as an anthem, but we'll have to see what happens. There's other little seeds, though. Yeah. And I agree with you in general. Like, Indiana is just kind of learning how to crawl.
Yeah, but it's a blank canvas. It's like huge blank canvas that you could do something with. So I hope something grows in that space.
Yeah. It was just so much fun. And, for those who couldn't make it for one reason or another, hopefully you can make it for the Nebraska game.
And dude, moving the students has been like an A+ move. It is.
It really
seem more engaged, more like they're coming up with more chants. They are louder. I mean, I was on the other side of this. We had some unique seat. We were on the field, which was very cool, on the opposite side, but you could hear them on the other side. Like, it was loud. Or we're normally very close to you, and they're loud, but like that's been a great move for the stadium.
Yeah, that reorg, as much as people were dissatisfied with it on social media, it's turned that end of the stadium, which is also where my seats are, into so much fun.
Yes.
And that enclosed end, I mean, the students are really into it. I don't know. I mean, students are an easy target. People have been blaming students for things, since time immemorial with IU athletics, when, really the finger should be pointed at alums and casuals. But man, the students were way into this game, and it was really, really fun watching them getting up over and over again and cheering this team on. And I think having them with the band is a really nice touch, like having them kind of surround the band. That's made a big difference as well. There are the seeds of a really cool stadium atmosphere starting to really be planted at IU. And unlike 2021, where, there was this big runway into that season, and really the two games that mattered, the Cincinnati game and the Michigan State game, Indiana just didn't deliver. Now Indiana has delivered in a game where everybody was there, and or at least most of the people, certainly all the students were there. You can build off of that, and you'll have to continue to deliver. But that doesn't necessarily mean you have to win every one of those games. People want good experiences. People want meaningful football, and they want Indiana to play good in meaningful football games. And it feels like Indiana is armed to be able to do that at this point, and that is really exciting to be able to say.
Agreed. And we don't want to go down this, just not down the rabbit hole, but a quick moment of saying, now it's always like, which comes first, the fans or the team. Like the team has done everything they need to do. Both Nebraska and Washington should be sellouts, like just hard stop. I mean, all Michigan should be too, and Purdue. Like there's the rest of the games in the schedule should be complete sellouts and 100% full. Like it's just there is no other reason why it should be that way.
Yeah,
they're all named opponents. They're all big games. You're playing for something. If you win this weekend, all of them, you're not just playing for a bowl. You're playing for what bowl. Walking out with my son James, who's still like understanding, and it's like I'm like, so if we win next week, like we'll be eligible for a bowl. I'm like, he's like, so then, and like that means that like after that, we're just getting better bowls as we win games. And he's like, so that normally. It's like normally it works that way. Like I've never been in that situation. Normally we're just like squeaking in and like, can we just get in Detroit and call it a bowl? It's just wild to think, beginning of end of September, we could be getting bowl eligible. It's wild, Galen. It is wild.
As we think about a couple of other things here, I know the bowl eligibility thing is just nuts to think about. And the fact that next week they play Northwestern at Northwestern, 3:30 Eastern kick on Big Ten Network. And they could be bowl eligible on October 5th, I think it is. I believe other than 67 doesn't count really because bowl eligibility worked much differently back then. This would functionally, I believe, be the earliest that IU has been bowl eligible in a realistic manner in its entire history.
Yeah.
And that's important to keep in mind that like prior to about 1984, there just weren't that many bowls.
I have. I know you're asking. I have the tickets left. If you want that and those numbers for the game.
So anyway, if Indiana wins that, we're going to come back and talk about the Northwestern game in just a second. But if Indiana wins the Northwestern game, they get a bye. They go to the Nebraska game for homecoming week. What does the ticket situation look like for Memorial Stadium in Indiana?
So total shout out to Tony Adrania, who came up with this great formula. Like just. People are awesome. There are 7,100 tickets left for the Nebraska game, 8,900 tickets left for Washington, 5,500 left for Michigan, and 8,700 left for Purdue. I think 600 tickets were sold yesterday for Nebraska or today. I'm not sure what today is like, if it's yesterday or today thing, but so 7,000. There's still 2 weeks left. I feel like we can get that cleared out in the amount of time, but that's still a good number of tickets for 7,000. Let's get those sold now.
Yeah, I'd say both. I mean, the Washington game, I think that'll be mostly IU fans. There aren't going to be a whole lot of Washington fans, but Nebraska fans will travel.
Yeah.
And this is where I do think it's important, if you're listening to this, buy some tickets for that game. Let's get majority or almost exclusively Indiana people in the stadium. I think that the idea that you're going to get invasions of other fans is still a thing, because I think IU fans are still, if you weren't jumping on buying tickets right away, like the Michigan game, for instance, there's only 5,500 tickets remaining, whereas there's 9,000 essentially remaining for Washington and 7,100 left for Nebraska. So that should give you a little bit of a sense of what you're looking at. But this is where IU fans, like we said it before, we said it going into this week, this is a team worth buying tickets to go see.
Yes.
Go take advantage of the opportunity. And, if I don't know what else they need to do at this point to earn a day. And yes, I know we've had complaints, and I understand the complaints about issues with parking or issues with concessions. I'll say this, get there a little early. I have not seen a lot of issues with the parking and concessions at all this year. Concessions for me have actually been in my area, because I'm over in like section 11, section 12. That whole setup is great. There's a lot of room. There's a lot of places to go. It's a much different experience than it has been in previous years. And parking wise, I mean, there's a lot of it is people, I think, waiting too late to try to get down there, and then things kind of get scrambled. That's not to downgrade the issues that some people have had, but I do think that if you give yourself a little extra time, the fun before the game has actually been really good. Like that whole atmosphere, I think IU Athletics has done a really good job of putting things together that have made it a fun place to go and experience in the hour or two before the game. It's probably worth taking advantage of that to get yourself into position earlier.
I would echo everything you said. I would say anybody who's saying that I would say, have you been to a game this year? Because I will say my experience this year has been drastically different than I've had season tickets since 2008. And then I used to go, obviously, when I lived in Bloomington from like 85 to 2000. This is the best experience I've had at Memorial Stadium in all of those years. And I mentioned to you yesterday, we had a soccer game up here. It got canceled late. And then, of course, the two kids were running out of the house late. We didn't get to Bloomington until like 11:10. I was very nervous what we were going to get to. A little bit of traffic on the bypass getting in, but it moved quickly. We were parked by 11:22. Had time to walk around the stadium, kind of bumped into a bunch of friends. And then, just my reptilian brain is like, we should probably leave with like 3 minutes to go. Cause I'm just like, I don't want to get caught in traffic out here. We park right in like lot 8 or 9, but like we're right there next to the Mellencamp practice facility. And it's always tough getting out of there. We stayed and again, credit to my wife, who's probably way the better half of our relationship. She's like, no, like we're staying to the effing end. And I'm like, you're right. But we stayed, had a great time. And then we get out and it's like, I got out in like 10 minutes. Like within 12 minutes, I was on I-69, which is like, I text you, like, this is unbelievable. Yeah. Like we left the stadium, I think at 4:22. I was at my house at 5:40. It was bananas.
When Scott texted me, I thought he needed me to come like change a tire for him or something. I was like, there's no way you're actually home.
Yeah. And people coming from Indy, like the 69 thing is just, it's once you get out, it's unbelievable. But normally it's like, it would take an hour to get to Memorial Stadium. That's not the case. Now, maybe there was enough people, a perfect amount of flow yesterday, but there was still a lot of people. There's like 35,000 there when the game ended. So all I can say is, if you're basing, and same thing with concessions, they have the quick, the lines, you get water, beer, hot dogs, you can scan out real quick. If you're hearing, oh, it's still tough, the traffic's tough to get out, like I would say, have you been to a game this year? Because I've been to all of them or all but one. And I've had the best experience in parking, in food, in the enjoyment. So like, again, I go back to things are changing and they're all changing for the better.
Yeah, it is a much better experience. And I think, and even the video board show in the stadium, it's a lot more in line with what you would expect to see at a Power 5 or Power 4 conference team. The whole experience has been upgraded significantly. So if you're on the fence about coming down because of bad past experiences, I had a similar experience to Scott. Now I live in Bloomington, so it's not that long of a drive, but we didn't leave. We waited till all the players came off the field. My daughter was standing down there, like, waving at the players and stuff like that. We took our time walking back to lot 12, and the departure was very simple. Like, it was not like we were stuck in traffic for long at all. We were out onto Fee Lane very quickly and got home in a very reasonable amount of time. So that would be the message, I guess. Like, let's get people buying tickets and coming down here. I don't know what else you're waiting for at this point would be my primary message to people. So, Scott, we mentioned the Northwestern game coming up this upcoming week, and I mentioned earlier 3:30 p.m. Eastern. Northwestern is not very good this year. This is a Northwestern team that, if you were paying attention in the offseason, Northwestern's one of those teams where they just have these random seasons where everything goes right. Not too dissimilar to what Indiana has dealt with last year. For a season that started as bad as it could for them, with Pat Fitzgerald getting fired before the season started. They ended up 8-5. They won a bowl game. Like, they had no business doing that, given that, they only scored 22 points a game. If you were paying attention, you're like, this might be a regression candidate. And wow, have they looked like it so far this year. 2-2. They had a bye this week, but they lost 24-5 at Washington. They lost 26-20 at home to Duke. Duke's a decent team, but they're only averaging 17 points a game. They've only allowed 15 points a game, which they get some credit for, but they have probably statistically at least the worst quarterback in the Big Ten. Jack Lausch, only a 48% completion percentage. He's got the lowest EPA per play of any team, of any quarterback of any team in the conference. This looks like, on paper, a game where Indiana is going to be a prohibitive statistical favorite. They're already a betting favorite that opened at 11.5. I can't remember the last time Indiana was a double-digit favorite in a road conference game. Scott, I mean, do you have a recollection of this? I certainly do not. But obviously a game that's going to be played in a unique circumstance in that lakefront stadium that they're playing in for temporary purposes while they renovate Ryan Field. And again, it's one of those games where Northwestern, as bad as they have often been on offense, they tend to cause the other team to make mistakes. They tend to not make a tremendous amount of mistakes themselves. You wonder, with a week off to study a lot of film, Northwestern's not a team that's got a tremendous amount of talent, but they're also not complete pushovers. They wouldn't have gone 8-5 last year if they were. You feel really confident about Indiana in this game, but it's also a game where Indiana can't take it for granted. And I think that is the message that certainly the coaching staff will be pushing across to these folks. The last time Indiana won in Evanston was 1993. They're 0-8 since then. And, this is a place, and it's a different stadium, mind you, as my doctor pointed out on Twitter, like there are no ghosts of old lacrosse players under the lacrosse field that Indiana's going to be playing on. But I do think it's worth noting, like, this has been a weirdly hard team to beat on the road for Indiana. All the stuff is lined up in a positive way right now for Indiana in this game, but Indiana just needs to make sure they take the game seriously from beginning to end. I'm a lot more confident in their ability to do that under this coaching staff than I would have been in other seasons.
So for all of your friends out there who are giving you crap about Indiana's schedule, I would just say this, that, the Big Ten let us out of the Big Ten East, which is nice. But to start the meat of the Big Ten schedule, we play Maryland. They're coming off a bye. We play Northwestern. They're coming off a bye. We play Nebraska. They're coming off a bye. We play Washington.
But yes.
What?
Well, we are too in the Nebraska game. But yes.
But then we play Washington, and they're coming off a bye. That's 4 weeks in a row. The team we're playing is coming off a bye. That seems a little bit unfair that everyone just gets 2 weeks to prepare for us during the meat of our schedule. But I guess it's like, all right, you don't get everything, IU. We're not going to give you. But anyway, that sucks. But I'm going to go back to what you said. Like, it's okay to be a little bit fun and cocky. We're a better team than Northwestern. It's fun pulling up their schedule and looking at their attendance. It's like 12,000, 11,000, 10,000. Like, they're trending in the wrong direction. They only had 10,600 of their last game. It's a temporary stadium. There's not going to be a lot of fans there. When Northwestern basketball was bad, that kind of became Assembly Hall North. A lot of IU alums in the Chicago area. I could see a lot of IU fans there. And, again, being a little bit confident with what we have, I think this was the perfect way to win the Maryland game. Is you won the game, you won kind of handily, but you made enough mistakes where it's not like Signetti and the staff is going to have a tough week getting the guys focused. It's like, hey, Curtis Rourke, you had a good game. Remember the 2 picks you threw back-to-back plays? All right, let's lock in. Let's quit screwing. You kind of had that perfect blend of like more than enough mistake. Hey, defense, think you guys are big, tough shit? Remember the one play 75-yard drive? All right, let's lock in. And I think that the way that this team has played and the seriousness which with this team has kind of taken these games lends me to believe I don't think they're going to take games off. They're going to forget about who they're playing, and does make me very confident that, we joked about it for UCLA, but it's like, this is a business trip. That's the way Signetti approaches these things. He doesn't look like the kind of coach who's suddenly going to be like, all right, man, let's have a party. Like, we're going to go in there and just, who cares? Like, I think he's really focused on winning all of the games, which I know is what coaches are supposed to do. Yeah. But it's like, I think this is what he wants to do. And it doesn't seem like he has a let's party and have a good time switch. It seems like, all right, we'll take 12 hours, enjoy this win. I'm going to write my letter to the students. And now we're focused on Northwestern. Like, I even saw, and I'm sure most teams do this, but I even saw the post of IU football had a picture of, as the players were going to the student section, they had already changed the imagery toward the locker room. That's like, next game's Northwestern. Yeah. Like, so the minute they're coming off the field, it's like, all right, we're focused on Northwestern. So this team and this staff has given you nothing to think that they're not going to come in prepared and ready to play against Northwestern. And if they do that, like, they should win, and they should win by probably 10-14 because they are a much better team than Northwestern.
I think you said it perfectly. I agree. And If I'm hesitant at all, it is simply because weird stuff sometimes happens in road games in college football, period. But this game is set up really well for Indiana. Like, I don't know that Indiana could be at a higher emotional or mental state. They really do look like they're coming together, and winning this game really, it completely fundamentally changes the way you think about the remaining part of the schedule. Because, dude, to be able to play this game, and look, we keep saying this and you keep knocking on wood, Indiana comes out of yet another game without seeming to have suffered any like sizable injuries. And also, and I think, especially in light of the UNLV thing, you're now in game 5, which means that if anybody was going to jump ship because they wanted to redshirt and then be in the portal, that's done as well. So it looks like Indiana's got their full.
They had like 6 guys do that, but it's like they were not major players, correct?
Right. So it does feel like Indiana has come out of this first part of the schedule intact, and now they go into an October where they play 3 games, and then they have a November where they play 4. And, to be 5-0 at this point and to be in the position that they're in right now, you could, as I said earlier, I don't know what Indiana could have done better than they've done over these first 5 games. You can only play the schedule that's in front of you. I don't think anybody expected UCLA to be this bad. UCLA lost to Oregon at home last night. I'll note that Oregon beat them by a smaller margin than Indiana beat them by. Might be meaningful. But to beat Maryland the way that they did this past week, and now to be able to play Northwestern and have that be one of your, that you've got 3 road games left in the whole season, and that is one of your,
you have 2. It's wild.
It's nuts to think about. But Indiana, over the course of the last 6 games, 4 of them are going to be at home. You couldn't set the table better for Indiana moving forward, and that is really exciting. So we'll have more talk throughout the course of the week.
Game. The last thing I wanted to hit on. The night game. You said come back to it.
I mean, here's the thing. Like, Nebraska did we were joking significantly in the stands as the scores kept popping up in the first half. And it's like, how is it scoreless between Nebraska and Purdue at half? Like, oh my God. I'm glad Nebraska came back and won that, because they have a fascinating game this upcoming week. They host Rutgers. Rutgers pulls off the win against Washington this past week. How well Rutgers travels, I don't know. I expect Nebraska to win because it'll be a home game. But
I'm getting a little back into social media and areas. I love the meme of like the Andy Dufresne in the rain, where it's like Indiana and Rutgers out of the Big Ten East. It's just like,
But I mean, that becomes a good win for Nebraska if they can beat Rutgers at home. A 6-0 Indiana team and a 5-1 Nebraska team, like that seems like a 7:30 kick. That seems like the kind of game that they would put. Because I mean, a lot of it really depends on, well, what are the other games that you're going up against in a given week? And if you go to, that would be week 8, and you look at the other games that would be in line in the Big Ten. You've got Michigan at Illinois. That will probably be the premier game. I'm imagining that might end up being like the 3:30 kick in that game, or that week. But you look down the rest of the lineup that week for the Big Ten, and you got Nebraska at Indiana. You've got who else is playing that week? It's kind of a weird week in college football in general. Like, it's Georgia, Texas, which should be a really good game. Alabama at Tennessee, Miami at Louisville, Auburn at Missouri, TCU at Utah, USC at Maryland. I don't know if that's really that marquee of a game, other than the fact that USC is playing.
Right.
That maybe becomes a 7:30 kick. That would be the one thing that might hold Indiana back from being able to play in that kind of a game. But I do think Nebraska, with the huge television audience that it has, especially if they are ranked again by that point, and Indiana's ranked, that would be the advantage it would have over USC Maryland, in that Maryland is almost certainly not going to be ranked. UCLA plays at Rutgers. I don't think UCLA has been good enough to warrant, being on that late. And you've got Wisconsin at Northwestern, and Iowa and Michigan State are the other 2 games in the Big Ten that week. It's like Nebraska, Indiana is like probably like the best game, or maybe the second best game in that lineup that week.
What about the Indiana Michigan game? Does that get bumped?
Well, hold on. I wanted to do Washington, Indiana next, because I think that because Nebraska, Ohio State is the premier game of the following week, but that has big noon kick written all over it.
Yeah.
No question as far as I'm concerned there. Penn State at Wisconsin, Illinois at Oregon, Washington at Indiana. It feels like Indiana, Washington's going to be kind of fourth in that line. So that really feels but again, because you're playing a West Coast opponent, that's probably not a noon kick. That's probably a 3:30 kick, which is great. I love 3:30 kicks, especially when we get to this time of year. Now, when you flip forward to the Michigan game, I'm pretty sure that's not a primetime game. I'm pretty sure that's a big noon kick that week. When I look at because it's like Purdue at Ohio State. I think Michigan and Indiana by that point is going to be a bigger game. And I think
a question about that game, I really got to ask you. There's it's no longer fever dream. We're getting into the thermometers in the orange, not the red. If we're 10-0 going into that game, are we ranked higher than Michigan?
Well, so Michigan's an interesting case right now because, I mean, they won this week and they get credit for winning this week, but man, they just don't look right offensively.
Yeah.
And I mean, they're taking pride in we won despite only throwing for 85 yards a game. Eventually that will not work.
You guys were champions last year. Just don't forget that.
And I think what's low key fascinating about that Michigan game is, so they beat Southern Cal at home 27-24. They beat USC. I know they hate it when I say Southern Cal. I apologize to our West Coast listeners.
They're in the Big Ten now. They can deal with it.
They beat Minnesota 27-24 again at home. Their next 5 games are at Washington, then a bye, then at Illinois, then Michigan State at home, then Oregon at home, and then Indiana on the road. That is in this Big Ten this season, that is 4 really tough games.
They lose 1 or 2 of those and we go 10-0.
Right.
We should be ranked ahead of them.
Maybe. And I think, and right now, if you look at FPI, which again is just a statistical projection of things, ESPN uses it if you go on their schedule page to look at, what the matchup numbers would be. Right now, with Michigan at 4-1, Indiana is a 68.1% favorite according to FPI to beat Michigan at home. This is where it's I don't want to get myself emotionally too down that pathway, but it is really fascinating the way all of that shapes up. And I do agree, if the projections simply that the computers are throwing out there hold up, Indiana could be 10-0 in that game, and I think they would be not just favored, but probably ranked ahead of Michigan. I will say this: if the one thing about the fever dream stuff that I would just be a little cautious about is that game at Michigan State is not a game that should be slept on or taken lightly, and I feel like a lot of people are right now. And look, I've been as guilty of this as anybody in terms of overlooking that game, overlooking the Northwestern game to some degree.
Their quarterback has something. He's electric. He's young. I think they have a good coach. I think they're a year away from being a really good team, but those are teams that normally when they're a year away, it means they have a couple of games where in the season before, it's you can see the highlights. They are well coached and have a really good young quarterback.
Yeah. So anyway, my point is don't get too far out over your skis, just in general, fans, but get somewhat over your skis. Be optimistic. And again, I just chided people for not just enjoying it. So I'm clearly talking out of both sides of my mouth here, but in terms of rankings, where people are
the right amount, the Galen amount.
Well, my point is more don't assume Indiana's going to be in the top 10.
Right.
But I do think that just on the numbers and the way the statistics are trending, Indiana they're playing better and the computers are evaluating them better than Michigan is right now. And you can say the same about Northwestern. You can say the same about Nebraska. You can say the same about Washington. A lot of what we're seeing out of Indiana so far, it's not a mirage. And I think the people that thought, it's a mirage because of the competition, now you've got live competition. They just beat, a top 6 quarterback in the Big Ten and a team that is going to be right on the borderline of 6-7 wins probably this year. If you're still questioning that, the one thing I'll continue to say is outside of Ohio State, who Indiana does have to play, unfortunately, and Oregon, who Indiana does not have to play, I think all of the other teams in the Big Ten right now are essentially on the same level or slightly lower than what Indiana is. I mean, if you go down the list, I don't think Penn State is that good. I think they deserve a lot of credit for the way that they beat Illinois yesterday, but I don't think that they are head and shoulders better than everybody else. Washington's got issues. Nebraska's got issues. Illinois is pretty good, but they're clearly not invincible as we saw yesterday. We just watched Indiana beat Maryland. Rutgers is still a bit flawed. USC, Michigan State, Wisconsin. I mean, that Michigan, that's the group that you're talking about there. And I think the way Indiana's playing is as good as any of those teams. And that's why I don't think that the 10-0 or 11-1 talk on the season is out of the realm of possibility. It's not fever dreams. It's not the Scott Fever Dream room. We need like a lounge or something for that.
Like the lounge.
The
Lounge is better than the room. Yeah, room sounds, yeah.
But it's really born out of just performance so far. And at this point, if you're going to say that other teams are going to continue to perform based upon what they've done statistically up to this point in the season, you got to say the same about Indiana.
In Scott's Fever Dream Lounge, we only serve artisanal arugula. Just so you know, like that's all we have there in the room is this little buskets of arugula. Last question for you, given the timeline we're in right now. Do you think we will get ranked this week?
Yeah, I do. And by the time this pod hits, we may already be ranked. I know Brett McMurphy, who didn't have Indiana ranked last week, had Indiana 24th. I think Indiana will land about 24th, maybe 23rd, which is fine. And it's funny because on the one hand, you can say, well, rankings don't matter. They do matter to Indiana. It's happened so infrequently. It is recognition on a national stage, which helps recruiting. It helps fans be excited. It helps alumni be excited. It helps students get excited. It helps the team feel like they're really accomplishing something. I mean, we talk so much about confidence. We talk so much about how important feeling like you belong is to football teams. For IU to be able to go into a game and say we are a ranked team, it doesn't mean that they're necessarily going to play better, but I do think that it helps boost the morale of the team and saying all this hard work is paying off and we're getting recognized nationally for it. And that does matter, I think, in the big scheme of things. Rankings don't matter to teams who get ranked all the time. Indiana does not get ranked all the time. So I think it happens this week.
I would agree. I kind of have enjoyed not being ranked, just kind of being quietly, coming up on people. But I think it would be a very flawed system if we don't get ranked at this point, especially when so many of the teams now have one loss. And it's like you get to a point where after 5, 6, 7, we're at 5. It's like, all right, there's 2 conference opponents. Like at some point you just got to stop the schedule talk. It's like we're winning games and Illinois has a loss. And it's like at some point wins are more important than losses, no matter whether you talk about strength of schedule. So I don't see any reason why, Illinois should be out and we should at least be in that spot.
The last thing I'll say before we finish, this was from Taylor earlier on of the FBI.
More info you're getting.
No, this was publicly tweeted. You could have accessed this too, but I gave you 80 minutes and you didn't bring it up. So I have no sympathy for you, sir. Indiana in the FPI, the power ranking that ESPN does, the computer-based one, LSU jumped them, so they're up to 16th, or down to 16th, I guess Indiana is. But Indiana is now projected to win 10 games. They have a 100% chance to win 6 games. I love how people just brush that off like it's not.
I know. It's wild.
What planet have we landed on? They have an 8.3% chance to reach the Big Ten or to win the Big Ten championship in the regular season. They have a 39.6% chance at being in the college football playoff, which is essentially a 40% chance.
That's wild.
It's wild to think about, and a 2.9% chance to reach the national championship. Now, I'm not counting that.
Yeah, that's probably.
But again, it's like if you finish 11-1 and your one loss is to Ohio State, it is a really fascinating pathway to walk down. Like, are you a favorite to get into the college football playoff now since it's 12 teams? It's almost, I don't even know how to approach that topic. It's like jumping from learning how to start a fire to quantum physics for IU football. I don't even know how to calculate. And again, part of it's like we haven't had a 12-team playoff before. We have no clue what it's functionally going to look like. But if Indiana keeps winning, they end up being as wild as it is in that conversation. And I don't know how that plays out. I don't think anybody really knows how strength of schedule is going to get factored in. And really it doesn't matter unless Indiana wins at least 11 games in the regular season, as far as I'm concerned. But the fact that that's even on the table and that 11 wins is only 1 win away from what FPI is currently projecting is nuts. It's nuts, Scott.
Well, it's nuts considering in our preview pod, we were both optimistic at 8, but we were having a discussion of if we make a bowl, like maybe Detroit or, the Nashville Bowl, it's like if I would have just said, well, Galen, what about the college football playoff, you'd be like, all right, you would like pause the pod and be like, hey, dude, like let's can we, like, I know you're the fun, crazy one. Like, let's take a breath. All right, we're gonna come back. I'm gonna edit this out. Like, I mean, to
right.
go from talking about, getting a Detroit Nashville bid to be like, or the college football playoff, like there's not a lot of teams that have that variance from one year. I mean, this is a team, we haven't made a bowl in 3 years. We won what, 3 games last year, 4 games the year before.
Yes.
It is wild to see this happening right before our eyes. And it's, if we don't make those heights, that's not a bad season. I'll take a breath and a step back. We're probably going to win 6 games this year. I say probably just because we haven't done it yet, but 100% chance to win 6 games. That's not nothing. Right. Like, all of this is awesome. And raising the floor is something that doesn't, like, this is where I'll say, it doesn't happen in one season. So suddenly now next year, college football playoff isn't the floor. Like, the floor for IU football for the foreseeable future, and probably under the Cignetti era, given his age, if we say it's 7 to 10 years, is just making a bowl. Like, that is where IU is going to be at for 10 years. Like, if we can have a 10-year stretch where we just make a bowl year in, year out, or we're in competition for a bowl most years, I think we're still in a spot. That's a really good season. And the fact that we are basically there at the end of September is something that needs to be really thought about and lauded. Like, that's amazing.
What's interesting also is Indiana, their strength of schedule has not been strong. It's 108th right now, but their strength of record, which is the ESPN calculates essentially the chance that an average top 25 team would have this team's record or better given the schedule. Indiana's 14th in strength of record. So they are performing at the level of a top 25 team. Their remaining strength of schedule is tough. They have their remaining strength of schedule is 31st in the country. And that is roughly the same that Oregon is going to be facing. It is slightly worse than what Penn State's going to be facing. It's slightly worse than what Michigan's going to be facing, but it's better than what like Illinois is going to be facing. So whatever Indiana does the rest of the season, they will have earned it against the schedule that they have remaining. And, I think that that's really exciting. I know
we're at hour 20, but it's like, I am tired of the strength of schedule thing. Because it's like in 2021, we had a very tough strength of schedule. That team wasn't great. We went 2-10.
Right.
So I always say to people like who give me any kind of that argument, it's like, hey, we had a really tough strength of schedule. We were 2-10. Nobody came to my defense and said, hey, man, IU's pretty good. They're just playing like, you're just like, hey, man, that team sucks. Like, What's more fun? Having to debate with somebody like, hey, don't care. Like, I can't hear you through all the wins. Like, all I do is win, win, win. Or do you want to just suck and be 2-10, but be able to rest on your laurels of like, oh man, we played a really tough schedule. Like this is way more fun.
So there's 2 more stats. I lied. I've got 2 more stats. Since why not go to an hour and a half? Because people have stuck with us that long. Hopefully you find this as joyous as we do. ESPN also has a stat called game control rank. And what game control rank is it reflects the chance that an average top 25 team would control games from start to finish the way that a particular team has done, given the schedule they've played. Indiana is 5th in the country in that. The teams that are ranked ahead of them right now, Ohio State is 4th, Texas is 3rd, Alabama is 2nd, and Tennessee is 1st. That says a lot. Like this Indiana, it's not just that Indiana's winning games. It is that they are choking their opponents out in these games. And there are very few teams in the country that are doing that. I mean, even other Big Ten teams. I mean, Penn State's game control rank is 22nd. Oregon's has been pretty good, and they're 12th. Georgia is only 16th in game control rank. And again, it's a reflection of you can only do what you do against the teams that you play. You can't really control who you're playing, but what you can control is how you're playing against those teams. And for Indiana to be 5th in game control and 4th in the country in average in-game win probability, which is the other really outstanding one. And again, the teams that outrank them there are Tennessee, Texas, and Ohio State. Really great company to be in. I am fascinated and really excited to see how Indiana fares against tougher competition, because if they maintain these patterns, that would be probably the most exciting thing that we've seen with IU football maybe ever. Not just that they're winning, but it's like, go back to 67. That team won a bunch of games in close fashion. 2019 was the same way. That team won a bunch of games in close fashion. This has been different, and that's what makes this team like both so joyful to watch, but also kind of hard to get your head wrapped around, because it's like a different team has put Indiana uniforms on. And to some degree, that's the case. Like this team just plays in a very different manner. Even when Indiana's been good, we have tended to watch them being good, almost like it's almost felt like it was not an accident, but like a little bit of luck was involved. I mean, even going back to 2020, which was statistically Indiana's probably best season, and with the exception of the end, that team was game control ranked 15th on the season for the whole year, and that we still look back at some of the performances that year, and it wasn't just that Indiana was winning, but they were winning handily. So that's going to be something to keep an eye on moving forward. Last thing I'll say, and this was again something that Taylor just tweeted out. Do you want to take this one, just so you can say that you read something that Taylor tweeted out?
No, you can say no. You're batting 1,000. Keep it going.
So Indiana is Taylor's tweet is Curt Cignetti is currently leading the biggest year one turnaround in IU football history, which isn't surprising. Indiana's 29th in the latest S&P Plus rankings, which is a 46% turnaround from last year. The previous high in any head coach's first year at IU is 33% increase. And the highest in the 21st century has been 30%. So my point being, like, this is unprecedented for IU just in general, what Cignetti is doing. And I'm fascinated to see how it continues, starting with this Northwestern game coming up over the weekend.
I think it's fair to say at this point, I'm going to go out on a limb. I think the Cignetti hire was a good hire, Galen. I feel comfortable. I think I'm comfortable making that call now. I think we made a good hire.
Yeah, between what was it? I think I saw it as a B plus on some sites. I think it was a B plus. It's a good B plus hire. Between that and Curtis Rourke, I mean, like Rourke coming in and I can tell you his NIL number is not nearly as high as a lot of quarterbacks that were brought in to be quarterbacks at Power 4 schools this year. I mean, he is third in the country, I think, in EPA per passing attempt, something ridiculous like that. Cignetti was a tremendous hire. Rourke was a tremendous player to bring in, and you can kind of go down the list. So many new faces to IU that just look perfect in terms of what the fit has been and how they've performed so far.
Yeah. No, I think we're good. Blue skies ahead, and I hope for more. I think we're going to have more positive podcasts like this moving forward.
I think so. I hope so.
Coach. Thank you, Coach Sig. And the last thing I will say is I texted this to you later. Like, the other really fun thing that's going on is there's a great subculture of Cignetti merchandise and just logos out there. Like, just go search and look around. There's some really hot stuff out there that is really good with Cignetti.
Yeah, there's a lot of really awesome stuff. Last thing I'll note, another new tweet. This is from Alec Lasley, ESPN's experts projecting who's going to make the college football playoff as of this morning, the 29th of September. One of our favorites, Bill Connolly, has IU as the 11 seed in the playoff, and Harry Lyles Jr. has Indiana as the 10 seed in the playoff.
My brain can't compute that. Like, I'm not sure I could understand. We'd have to go to that game. I don't even know. When is that game? Where is it played? Like, how does that work?
Well, and it's fascinating because in one matchup, according to this, long time in the future projection, it would Harry Lyles Jr.'s projection would have it be Georgia versus Indiana in the college football playoff first round, and Bill Connolly would have, because of course he would, Tennessee versus Indiana in the college football playoff first.
A Gator Bowl rematch.
Oh my God, I'm not sure my heart could handle it. But anyway, all right, we've gone long enough.
Yeah.
We'll go ahead and wrap up for this week. A lot of programming coming up later on in the week, so be sure to tune in. We've got Bison Chat on Tuesday night. It'll be night this time. Normally 6:30 p.m. We're going to bump it forward. We're aiming for about a 9:30 start Eastern time on Bison Chat. So if you haven't watched the Tuesday night Bison Chat yet, tune in. It'll be live. We'll have the stream on the Back Home Network YouTube feed. We'll also have a tweet that'll go out on X about it. So set your calendars to that. Myself, Joe Cronin, Emily Fox producing that. We'll have some special guests this week. Should be a lot of fun. Crimson Cash coming out Thursday of next week or Friday of next week, Scott?
Probably Thursday.
Okay. And then we might be able to grab one more podcast before we get fully into it.
On Crimson Cash, we started a new segment just because Indiana's been doing so well, called the Hoosier Hot Streak. So every week, James is betting Indiana and then adding a team parlay. So this week, we bet Indiana money line, Michigan money line. We won. And so next week, he's got to add two teams to it. We're just going to see how many he can stack in a row, and then we'll go back if he craps out. But I think if you're listening, you're making some money in these parlays, and it's fun betting with Indiana because right now we're all on a hot streak.
So check out that and check out the entire rest of the lineup on the Back Home Network. We got basketball talk starting up once again as practice has started this week. The start of the season, at least on the preseason level, only a month away, which is hard to get your head wrapped around. So all of that and more coming up this week on the Back Home Network. We appreciate you folks tuning in once again. Indiana victorious 42-28 over the Maryland Terrapins, 5-0 on the season. They face Northwestern this upcoming week. My thanks to you, Scott. As always, a pleasure. My thanks to all you folks that we met all throughout the weekend. Really appreciate you folks coming up and saying hi. For Scott, I'm Galen. This is Crimson Cast. We'll catch you folks on the flip side. Bring back the Bison. Stay never daunted. So long, everybody. Goodbye, YouTube.